grain salad, all right? These grains in particular, not legumes, these are all made from grasses. So they're going to include things like we have a beautiful Israeli couscous, which is a very large grain pasta to start with, some orzo, a little red quinoa, some baby chickpeas for some legume representation in there. This is going to be a salad of half herbs and aromatics and a salad of half grains themselves. We cool it all the way down, it's served cold. This is a traditional salad served out in the Middle East. So if you ever have like Greek cuisine, Turkish, things like that, you'll see tabbouleh pop up more often than not. So, yes, first thing up, burner on high. We're gonna do this a 1-to-1 ratio when we're serving grains like this. If we're making barley, grains, flour seed, typically unlike rice, they'll absorb less water. So we'll be using 1/2 water and 1/2 grains, 1-to-1 ratio, right? Meaning if you got a cup of grain, you gotta have a cup of water. Bring that up to a boil first before you get started. That way everything is cooking nicely, right? Thanks so much, Chef. All right, for our mise en place today, off this card, I have the ingredients you guys are gonna need. If you guys all check out your recipes today, you're gonna be using some cherry tomatoes, fresh lemon juice, makes a world of difference as far as flavor goes. We're gonna be using an assortment of 3 herbs today that you'll see a lot in Middle Eastern cuisine. Mint, parsley, and dill. All right, mint and dill are leaned on a lot heavier in other countries for like typical aromatics. Over here, we'll typically use things like rosemary, thyme, parsley, things that grow more local. All right, and just some nice crunchy cucumber for a little texture on top of our grains as they stand. All right, so directly in, salted water like you're cooking pasta, which means lots of salt. All right, you want it salty like the ocean. All right, so it's quite a bit. All right, easy stuff first. For those of you who've never seen the cherry tomato trick, all right, cherry tomatoes you can do between 2 lids, right? Don't cut them one at a time. All right, that's going to ruin your day if you're doing a case of tomatoes. Set them into one lid with the flat side down so they all sit in there like a wee bowl. Put the other lid upside down over the top of that. Can everybody see okay on that side? Put them upside down. Put a flat hand on top of this. Don't curl your fingers around or you're gonna find your fingertips after you find the tomatoes. Just got a nice sharp knife all the way through those tomatoes, and now all those tomatoes are nicely in half. All right, if you're doing a bigger project, you can use a bigger lid. When I'm doing them for production, I'll use 2 large Cambro lids and a slicer knife, and I can do probably an entire pint of tomatoes at a time, depending on your put together, all right? Everybody's gonna come live in the same place, so after you got your mise en place, we're just gonna build that into our bowl. The last thing to go into our bowl is gonna be our grains, all right? Just like that, cherry tomatoes, done and dusted, all right? To this, we're gonna add some cucumber. Very simple. You can serve this with the skin on or off. These are pickling cucumbers, which have a nice, crunchy, sweet skin. So I love to use the skin of these cucumbers in particular. I'm going to quarter these. First, that seed pod is sitting directly on top of my cucumber. That's gonna make it easier to seed. With my knife and my cucumber with the cut end facing towards my knife, I'm gonna hold my knife at a 45-degree angle, and I'm just gonna trim off that seed pod. All right, this is going to be waste in our case. We're going to be using this crunchy cucumber as our fillet for dicing. All right, we're going to be cutting this to a small dice today. How large is a small dice for a short review? 1/4 inch all the way around. An eighth is called a what? It starts with a B.
Oh, that's an
Close. A brunoise is an 1/8 of an inch on all sides. Very, very fine dice. All right, skin side up with a nice sharp knife. We're going to do 1/4 inch thick batons, putting down our cucumber here. Cucumber. Think of this as making a very herbaceous dressing with some bits in it, all right? To our actual bits themselves, we'll have our mint. Everything needs to be pulled down, meaning all these leaves got to come off the stem. And only on the very end there, you guys will see the floret. That's a part that we can use the stem of. Everything else is just too woody, too fibrous to process raw. When we're making a lot of this at a time, and this is a small batch that we're making today, we'll be using a Robocou over on Grand Manger Station, which is a food processor, to break this up a little faster so you guys aren't stuck over there doing a chiffonade of all these beautiful vegetables. It'll come out nicer if you do it with your hands. For the sake of time and speed, if you guys are going to make 3 gallons of tabbouleh, you're better off using some machine to help shorten the job a little bit. All right. The only downside of not using your hands is that with a knife you can very nicely chiffonade these. Chiffonade, again, is the name of those long strips that we have. Right, that makes it so we don't bruise them as we cook them. As you can imagine, in a machine, it's going to bruise the herbs a little bit, which is going to give them a shorter shelf life. and it's not going to preserve as much flavor for the customer. We're going to wind up with some of that flavor juice in the machine rather than the customer's mouth. All right, I'm going to pick all my herbs together today and do a chiffonade of all of my ingredients. All right, my water's coming up to a boil right now with salt. Pardon me, chef. Since my water's coming up with salt, I'm going to add the grains. Can I switch you over for a second, chef? Grains are underneath. All right. As soon as the grains go into salted water, today we're using the steaming method. We talked about the 3 methods of preparing grains yesterday. Steaming is one. What are the other 2? Pilaf is the one, and the other one is?
Risotto.
Very good, guys. We'll be preparing a risotto, and I'm pretty sure everyone in this room has had quite enough pilaf for a century of work, all right? So if anyone has any questions on the pilaf method, we can go over that again independently, all right? Top goes on, bring it up to a low boil, pop a lid on it, kick your heat down by half, allow that to soak up all of the water inside of that pot, which means it's also soaking up the what that I added to that water? Salt, right, yeah. Without that salt, that's gonna be the only salt we use in the entire recipe. We will neither season, right, before or after we get done with this. All right, that way we can control the amount of salt in our recipe, right? And again, salt aggressively when using beans, pastas, rices, things like that. As with the potatoes, some of you guys discovered in potato cookery last week, how much salt did it take to make you taste the actual salt? An absolute gushing amount of salt, correct? So, as with all starches, and with dairy, fatty things like cream, butter, and other things like that, you'll notice that the salt content falls away very quickly. So when you're gonna chiffonade a great big pile, I start with my biggest leaf first. Like if I had basil in this pile, that would have been the first thing I picked. I picked my biggest herb, and then my medium herb, and then my smallest, and I'm gonna roll this into a little burrito. All right, get it all rolled up. Just start from the bottom, crush it up with your fingers, and just start grabbing all those extra bits until you got a tight little herb burrito waiting for you on the other side. All right, to this you're gonna slice very thin and as closely together as possible so that you get a great big chiffonade from your pile. As closely together as possible and kind of putting a lot of pressure. And again, on my grip here, I'm using that claw method. My thumb is tucked behind my fingers, and I'm kind of coming around the pile with my fingertips just to make sure that everything stays together nice and tight. If this starts to fall apart in your hands, just take a second, re-roll the back of your pile, and continue on through. The fewer times with your knife through, the better, and use as much of your knife as possible to get through this pile. If we are using the energy just going straight down, we're actually just smashing the herbs into pieces with the pressure of my knife headed straight down, right? It's a blade, not a wedge. So it's better going in this direction than it is this direction, all right? So just slide it across your herbs using as much of your knife as possible and just get once through, all right? So check your pile. To our chiffonade herb, we're gonna add that to our big pile. Delicious. Thank you, chef. You guys got a scraper handy? That is wonderful to get all of the herbage off your cutting board. All right. Now for our dressing, right? We're going to be using some olive oil and some lemon juice for our dressing itself. I've got some beautiful lemons here. We're just going to roll those on our cutting board. That's going to break the seed pods inside of the lemon. They should be flexible in my hand. I should be able to freely squish it with my hands. All right. Nicely rolled. You should be able to smell it. That's the lemon oil on the outside. Right? If you have low quality lemons, or you find yourself in the dead of winter without access to really nice fresh lemons like these ones, you're going to want to use the zest in this recipe as well to get more lemon-ish flavor out of it. But these are nice and sweet, a little sour, and they've got a lot of character to them still in this part of the summertime. When you cut your lemons for juicing, cut them on an angle, straight through. That's going to help the juicing process a lot. Right? And you've got a high side and a low side. Wrap your fingers around the high side. You're squeezing towards the low side and over one hand as basically a little sieve to catch any of the seeds. Straight through. We've got our dressing made except for olive oil. We'll start in through there, and my grains are looking just about ready. If you guys can see in the lookup, the water has disappeared behind the surface of my grains themselves. Once it disappears below the surface of a grain, we're going to cut the heat, unlike for pasta where we just boil it all the way through and strain it. We're going to cut the heat, leave the lid on. We're going to let this rest for about 5 minutes, let it really take in all that juice, and then we'll add it into our tabbouleh itself. Which I mean, right? You can taste things better when they have oil on them. A dressing just made of vinegar and other ingredients, right, won't taste as much of itself unless it has the presence of oil. Same way when we make any cold salad, you can't really taste things essentially in your mouth without the presence of some fat. So even something you think doesn't need some, don't be afraid to add a little nicely. Just give this a light toss. Right into this, we should be able to put our grains. All right, I like to add my grains warm. If you're making a very large batch and you add them warm, we're going to be cooking the herbs. With a batch this small, we can do it cold. I'm just going to tip it for any excess moisture. Almost none comes out. That's a great sign. Let that sit to steam all the way through. These should be al dente. When we cook grains al dente is Italian for
To the tooth.
to the tooth. I always say to the bite, right? We're just going to give this a little toss. Let them starchy so they'll hang on to one another. And then we're going to dump them out. Nice. All right, cool this in the wok-in until the steam dissipates and it becomes just about shy of room temperature. Toss this with your tabbouleh, return it to the sheet pan, and we'll let that cool all the way down to 40 degrees, at which point we'll be able to eat and serve this. Okay?
Yes,
So
sir.
your goal in groups of 3 today, establish tabbouleh salad. All right.